Where's Lauren?
Exactly. Hi, everybody. We're
Live
live.
from USA.
Yes, live from
Not all over
wherever
the planet,
everybody's from.
because fortunately it's all Americans here, or
I
USA
don't.
citizens.
I don't want to alarm anybody who is watching, but we were talking about Star Trek right before we went live. So,
But we are
I hope
also
that's not.
Watched recently Star Trek Prodigy. Holy crap, that show surprised me.
Oh, me too. Right? Isn't it?
So
Yeah.
here's the thing. Kind of the magic of Star Trek for a while, starting with the Next Generation, but then you also have like DS9 and Voyager. It was kind of like the MCU in that it was like one ongoing story that just like jumped between shows, but you would still see characters appear like in their neighboring shows, and it just kept going for a while. And I like that aspect of it. But since then, then it just stopped for a long time. And then they released Picard as kind of a sequel to that. But it's kind of been a mixed bag. Prodigy, that actually does feel like a sequel to Voyager, as a sequel to DS9, a sequel to TNG. That to me feels like a much more natural next step in the Star Trek storyline, if we're to consider it, one big thing.
I've heard other people say that, and I think that's really interesting because honestly, when I watched it, like other than the obvious stuff, like there's a Janeway character, and there's some stuff that happens in the Delta Quadrant. I mean, for the most part, like when I watch it, I wasn't thinking of it as like any kind of a successor to Voyager. I think
Well,
because it does so much of its own stuff. Like it does have plot points that connect to stuff from Voyager, like with Chakotay and the original crew of the ship and all that stuff. But it's so much about doing its own thing that even when they do like really directly reference stuff from older Star Trek shows, like when they have that one of my favorite episodes when they go to that planet where like the red shirt from TOS crash landed like 100 years ago, and they did the Star Trek alien thing where they become like a cargo cult, and they reorient their entire society around what they think of how they interpret,
Well, to me, it's not
Starfleet.
just
Yeah.
direct references, and it's not just characters reappearing. It's that when we do see some of those other characters, like say Okana, obviously he's a lot
Yeah.
older than he was in TNG. He's getting gray. And even Janeway, she and Chakotay and all those characters are a little older. But also, I like how it keeps expanding because now, like we start, in that the what is it, the Delta Quadrant
I
with
think it starts in the Delta. Yeah, that's where the
yeah.
planet where they're all being held at the beginning is supposed to be. Yeah.
And we follow a bunch of characters who were born there who've never even heard of Starfleet.
Mhm.
And it's just interesting to kind of work our way backwards. Instead of following humans and having Earth as a reference point, we're starting way from the other side and seeing them work their way in. And
Yeah.
one of the moments that stuck out to me most was when they got to that Starfleet outpost. And it's like, oh yeah, this is the furthest outpost we have. So of course that's the first place they would stop. And it's just interesting getting that outsider perspective. So it's little things like that. That's what I'm talking about when I say it feels like
Yeah.
the next chapter, like TNG, DS9, Voyager, Prodigy, Picard. I don't really give a shit.
Prodigy was I've said it. I know I've said it a couple times before, but like of all of the new shows that have come from since Discovery, Prodigy has been the most wonderful surprise because I started watching it and I thought, well, it's I'll check it out. I'll just give it a chance. It's Star Trek, but I wasn't expecting to love it because I was like, well, it's a kids show. It's like the first animated show that they're aiming specifically at a younger audience, and I was just expecting to watch it and be like, well, this is fine, but this isn't really for me. And by like episode 3 or 4 I was just totally hooked on it. I did
Yeah,
not expect to like it as much as I did, and it wound up
but
being, now it's second to Strange New Worlds. I think it's my favorite of the new shows.
Yeah,
my
I haven't
only
checked it
oh,
out.
go
I
ahead.
haven't checked it out yet, but I kind of wanted to. But it's just there's so many things, right? There's only so many hours
Yeah.
in a day,
Yeah.
and so many series you can watch. And the other thing too, I find like what I'd rather do with series now is let like a whole season be released and then binge watch it, because
Yeah.
your experience, how you experience it, and your perception of it's so different. And I think about, like, I remember watching Deep Space Nine when it was new, and Next Gen when it was new, and years later, and when Deep Space Nine, I stopped watching Deep Space Nine like halfway through the first time through. I just it wasn't liking. I didn't like the Dominion. I really hated the Jem'Hadar. But then a friend of mine loaned me. He had all 7 seasons on DVD, and I binged watched them in like a few like three weeks, I think.
Yeah.
And my perception of it, because when you're seeing episode after episode after episode, so there are some. So while Deep Space Nine is more, it's kind of a good combination of episodic and serial.
Yeah,
it was the same way that Babylon 5. So
definitely.
There's those through lines that run through, and so when you're watching them episode after episode, you actually get to appreciate those in ways you can't when there's big gaps between episodes. When you're taking a week, or sometimes even if you miss a week, and then those through lines get lost. Though I think what's kind of a shame about, you mentioned, obviously Picard's been a mixed bag, is that. And Picard's not the only one, but there's so many shows now that the whole season is a story instead of, so they've totally thrown out the episodic element of it instead of trying to find a balance. And I think
there's no time to relax.
Yeah, there's no time to relax.
Yeah.
There's no time to actually do like a character building story or something like that, because then you're throwing off the flow. Now you're dragging because everything's built around that one story. Steve, I know that's one of your big criticisms of season 2 of Picard is how it's your perspective, it drags. Well, that's the problem. You inject a character episode, and they have a couple like that, and then it totally derails the rest of the story. But if you built a show that was episodic with through lines, that wouldn't be the case. And
these days, you wouldn't
have resolutions that happen, and you wouldn't be waiting till the last 2 episodes for any kind of resolution.
Well, it's like I said about The Last of Us. The Last of Us pays off an important plot thread in like episode 6, so you don't feel like you're waiting until the last episode to get to the payoff. I mean, you wait to the last episode to get to the big ultimate payoff, but there's other stuff that gets paid off along the way. And like another example is, and like I think the revival seasons that they did of the X-Files a couple years ago were mostly not that great, although they did have some. They did have some really good episodes like sprinkled in there, but overall I would say it wasn't all that great. But the first season that they did that, where they did the revival, I think they did 6 episodes, and they did do something that I thought was really smart, where instead of trying to do a full like serialized 6-episode story like is often done with streaming shows now, they did a first episode that set up like a larger story, and then they did 4 mostly self-contained episodes, and then they picked up the story from episode 1 and episode 6. So and there were references to it along the way. There were little things in the standalone episodes to kind of refer to it or to let us know that was still going on or that was still a thing, but it was only the focal point of the first episode and the last episode. Again, even though I don't think that story was all that great, the idea of, instead of trying to drag it out for the entire run of the show, do the setup at the first part and the payoff in the last part, and then structure the show in between as mostly standalone episodes, is something that I really wish more showrunners of especially streaming shows would do.
I wish the Mandalorian would do that, because quite frankly, I mean, like the first season was cool, but it dragged. The second season, again, it was the same. It's like, well, it's the same. Like, when is this going to be over? Like, it's the same damn story. It took 2 seasons to get where we're going, and then I haven't watched the new season yet. But then I saw fucking Grogu, and I'm like, no.
Here's what's look. So
go ahead, Nick.
So look. This is the dumb thing, is they took the next part of the Mandalorian story and they put it in the Book of Boba Fett. They had a whole episode just showing Din trying to not be depressed without Grogu around, and trying to go like visit him on Luke Skywalker's new school. And at the end, like, Luke's like, okay, Grogu, this is where you have to decide if you're going to throw away any chance of happiness in your life and just become, like a Jedi acolyte, whatever, or you can forget everything and go see your dad. And what do you think Grogu picked? He went to go see his dad. So
And
same
you know why
status
they
quo as
did
before. Now he's not going to
and,
be a Jedi.
and basically it comes down to Grogu is super popular. And it's
Yeah.
basically it's not the Mandalorian anymore. It's a fucking Grogu show, right? So basically, it's like, well, we had to come up with some excuse as to why we could go back to having Grogu again.
Yeah.
And it's like, so I haven't watched it because I'm just like, I'm irritated. I'm really
What happened was they reached at the end of season 2 when Grogu goes off with Luke, and I was not a fan of Luke's appearance. I felt it was fan servicey and gimmicky. But when Grogu goes off with Luke, that's a natural endpoint for the series.
Right.
But they still want to make the series.
Yeah.
So they have to undo it, even though that is a natural, that should have been the last episode of The Mandalorian, because The Mandalorian is about Mando and Baby Yoda and their adventures together. And they've reached a crossroads where Baby Yoda is going to go off to study to be a Jedi, and Mando is going to go on without him. They say their farewell. Grogu goes off with Luke. Mando is pointed in another direction. End
It's
of
Wolf
series.
and Cub.
Right. Yeah, exactly. End of series. But they want to keep making it because it's a super successful show. So they're like, oh shit.
But the really dumb thing is that they took the next part of the Mendo story and they put it in another show.
In a completely different show.
Yeah, so people who haven't watched the Book of Boba Fett, they'll be extra confused. Like, wait, what?
Well,
Why is he
the
still
thing
there?
is that they wanted, they wanted that bridge because the Book of Boba Fett was not as popular, so they were trying to amp up the ratings. But also, again, the thing is, if they wanted to bring back Mandalorian, like, because I agree with you, Steve, that was it was ending of the series, whether you like how they did it or not, it's the ending of the series.
That was the end. Yeah.
But if you're gonna do more, do the new adventures of Mando, right? Now he's got some new bugaboo that some new MacGuffin that he's gonna ride to death for the next 2 seasons.
Give him some cats.
There you go.
I think the Book of Boba Fett was just an excuse to get Boba Fett riding a Rancor.
Yeah.
I just want to say, going back to Star Trek a bit, think about something like some of the weird tangents in Voyager, like, the Thaw, the evil clown episode, and how that ended. Think of how abruptly that episode ends. It doesn't say anything about the next episode, the ongoing plot. It's just a cool shot. And then think about, like, when the Doctor's consciousness, it gets uploaded in 7 of 9 cybernetics, and her personality starts like blending into his. And so you have the actress really showing her range by acting like the Doctor. You would not get an episode like that nowadays because it would be called filler, not important to the plot.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
and the thing is, like, and I know, and Isaiah, your hand's been up for forever, so I want to let you talk as soon after I make this point. Like, when you go back and you watch Babylon 5 or Deep Space Nine or another show that I think today, if you haven't watched them for a while, you kind of imagine them as being a lot more serialized than they really were. Because even though they did have those through lines, and especially, like, I mean, Babylon 5 pretty much had it all the way through, and Deep Space Nine really had it in the later seasons, where the episodes tied together and told much larger stories. But for the most part, the episodes themselves were still beginning, middle, and end. And they carried the larger stories along, and they progressed, multi-episode stories, but the episodes themselves were, for the most part, self-contained. And, like, Nick, when you point out, like, like the end of the Thaw in Voyager, it doesn't set up anything for the next episode. It doesn't there are no larger storylines referred to. Even in episodes of Deep Space Nine, until you get to the very, very end, where they do that 9-episode arc, where it's really tightly serialized. Up until then, like when you're in season 4, 5, and 6, when the Dominion story is getting going, and they're pushing that forward. Even in episodes that further that larger story, usually the ending is just the ending of that episode. Like, it doesn't end on a tease for what's going to happen next. There's stuff in the middle of the episode that furthers along the larger plot, but the episode itself is mostly concerned with its story. And that, again, that's something that I feel like a lot of modern writers forget, is that you can further a larger multi-episode story arc by having stuff related to that story happen in an episode without it being a cliffhanger or a tease at the end. It can just be something that happens in a scene in the middle of the show, just to remind us that that's going on, or
Right.
just to have some little thing push forward in that. A character makes a discovery that's going to be important later, or whatever. And most of the episode can still be about its own standalone story, but you take that larger story and you progress it a little bit, or you keep it in the mind of the audience. Even if nothing really important happens, you just remind us, okay, that's still going on, and and something's coming with that.
And one thing like Babylon 5 did is almost every episode has an A story and a B story.
Mm-hmm.
And so the B is the background story. It's not the focus of the episode. So sometimes the arc is in the B story. In fact, sometimes the arc's not in the A or the B story. It's in the C. I call it the C element.
Yeah.
There's a little drop-in little thing like you're talking about. So one of my favorite things, it's not a great episode. In fact, it's usually regarded as one of the worst episodes, but TKO.
Yes. Yes.
It's not a good episode, but I tell people, because when people say, well, what episode should I skip? I'm like, you technically can skip it, but no, because there's one little moment where someone's reading a Galaxy Today newspaper, and there's a focus on it, and it talks about the upcoming election, and it talks about the Psi Corps endorses Clark, and this is unusual that they've never endorsed a candidate ever before. They've always stayed out of politics. And you think it's nothing, but of course, those of us who watch the series, we all know, wow, that's a big deal.
That's going to be important.
Going on there.
Yes. Was TKO the one with
drop in? So it's neither an A element or a B element. It's a third element just dropped in to further the overall story arc, and it takes up 30 seconds, if that.
Was TKO the episode with the boxer and he
let's let Isaiah.
Yes.
Yeah, Isaiah, please, at long last. Sorry about that.
I just wanted to say thank you guys for being there for me, because I had a difficult couple weeks. So I wanted to say thank you for being there for me. And
no problem, my friend. Are things going a little better?
Kinda, yeah. I got I'm in therapy. So I'm in mental health therapy, but
okay, good.
I'm still having issues with my film people. So I guess I just gotta cut them loose and move on. That's what people do. But I know that for the most part, like I did say something that kind of rubbed them a little uncomfortably. So I'm not. It's not like I'm completely an angel, but I guess I just wish that they understood more, but
yeah, it's a tough spot,
Yeah.
But I'm glad you're doing a little better, at least, and I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
Okay.
So, sorry, did you have something else to say, Isaiah?
It's all right.
Yeah, I didn't realize that because we're not hooked up on Facebook, so I didn't know you were having some troubles, but.
Before I forget, so like the problem with this pressure to cut out all the filler and just have plot, constant momentum is we don't get a lot of time to actually get to know these characters. Whereas some of my favorite episodes of DS9 are the Ferengi ones. Because I love Ram, I love Nog, I love the bomb. And any episode that's just any episode that's just their like sitcom like shenanigans are some of my favorite parts, because we're just getting to spend time with them. And I like getting to know them. If all those episodes weren't there, Quark and his family would be much less interesting.
Right.
Right. No, I think the actor, I forgot his name, the actor who plays Quark, whenever he knows that there's
Armin Shimmerman,
whenever there was like a Ferengi focused episode, he was like, okay, gets everyone together at his house to do like a reading at his house. So that's where it's like they not only did they have the connection on the show, but they have the connection on off the set as well, which like it makes it like a really enjoyable on screen and stuff like that.
Heck, the root beer scene, that scene is literally filler. They threw that scene
Yes.
in because they still had a few minutes left. The story they wrote was too short, so they needed to pad it out. And it's one of the best scenes in the show.
It is a great.
We-
It is a great.
I
it is
saw
a great
an
scene.
interview with him, and he said that they, I forget the details exactly, but Zimmerman and I forget the name of the character. I think it was mainly Zimmerman got the writers to, or they went at it a different way, and
Yeah.
Andrew
they had to
Robinson.
fight. They had to fight
Andrew
the producers
Robinson,
to make it
Garrett.
better. But
I mean,
the
it's
way that
like
they
you
wrote
see
them.
scenes like that show that no filler is good actually.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is like, yeah, I mean, what people call filler, because yeah, I
Yes.
mean, we talked about that, Dana and I talked about that when we watched that episode on Trek Reluctantly, because that's a 2-part episode, or no, it's a double episode. It's not a 2-part. It's a double episode, and you know, there are times when that episode feels where that episode feels a little padded, where it feels like, you know, well, this is a double episode, so we have to make it a double episode. And maybe given the story they're telling, it didn't really need to be a double episode, but they stretched it for, you know, commercial reasons. But the upside of that is if it wasn't a double episode and they weren't trying to fill out a particular runtime, that scene would not be there, because
Right.
there's no reason for that scene to be there in that story. But it's a great scene.
Right.
And it makes that episode better. And the only reason they had time to have that scene in there is because they were trying to fill. Now, I don't think that scene, I don't think it's fair to call that scene filler, because I think it's a really good character scene. But like, if they didn't have an extra long runtime to fill up, then, you know, that scene, in terms of the plot of that episode, there's no reason for that scene to be there.
Right.
That's my only problem with Prodigy. It's not that it doesn't have those good like episodic moments. It's just that because of the shorter runtime, everything has to move kind of fast. So the first episode especially, it's just mile limited. Give me a little bit of sensory overload, but whatever. Still good show overall.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to say that I love about Prodigy is the art style. Holy crap. Computer animation for kids shows is getting great lately. And it's like, it doesn't need to look realistic. It just needs to look cool. And
Yes.
I love the character designs. Not just the alien aspects, but how they all have little scars and like imperfect teeth and just blemishes here and there that make them feel more real. I like that they take the time to, you know, add those imperfections. And show that these kids have been through quite a bit already, even before the story starts.
Yeah.
Last thing I want to say. Oh, sorry. Last thing I want to say about.
Before we get too far away from it, I was going to say, like, to your point about the Ferengi, another like one of my favorite episodes of the entire series is House of Quark, right?
Yes.
That's a total
Sure.
character Ferengi character building thing, and a little bit, and of course the Klingons as well. But yeah, it has nothing to do with anything else going on.
Quark
And-
defeated a Klingon without throwing a single punch.
That's right.
Oh, that one, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
I mean, and you think about that, you know, and you think about how that, you know, the how brave that was. He's like, well, it's like, yeah, well, if if you're gonna kill me anyway, screw it. You're not gonna get any honor. You're not gonna get it, you know. So, you know,
Yeah.
you have to tell people how you got your house by, you know, murdering a helpless Ferengi. And of course, the Doris guy's willing to do it.
He's like, I'll do it.
and that's the thing, but because he didn't know that was going to happen, right? Because Gowron could have been like, yeah, cut his head off. You
Yeah,
know?
go ahead. We're Klingons. Our honor is completely inconsistent anyway. Like,
right.
how do you know there's not some weird Klingon ritual that's like, oh no, you're totally allowed to honorably kill a guy in this circumstance? You know,
Well,
like you don't know.
One of the things, though, too, and again, it's kind of on the theme of what we've been talking about. It was one show that does a very good job of having enough of those quote unquote filler elements,
Mhm.
even though it is a serialized show.
Yeah.
And because again, it somehow turns a serial show into episode. Like the episodes, just, even though there are bridges to the next episode, the episode is still fairly well self-contained. Is All Murders in the Building.
Yes.
That show is
Yes.
fantastic.
Which is a great show, yeah.
My wife was watching it, and we first started watching it. She's doing watch it, and I was like, oh, you know, it looks like a drag. And then by the end of the second episode, I'm like, when's the next episode coming out?
That is a really good show. And what I love about that show is because I follow some people on Twitter who are also fans of it, and it's interesting to see like the two different groups of fans of Only Murders in the Building, because there are the people who are like the diehard mystery buffs who are really into whatever the case is that season, who
Right.
want to know like who the killer is, right? And then there's people like me who watch it because it's funny and because I like the characters and I like the performers and it makes me laugh. And honestly, I don't give a shit what the solution to the mystery is. Like, I'm just watching it because it's an entertaining, fun show and I'm into these characters.
Right.
And by the end, and you get to the last episode and you see the solution and hopefully you're like, oh yeah, that was clever. That makes sense. But like, that's not what's keeping me there. What's keeping me there is that it's funny. And there's other people that are like super invested in the mystery. So I think that's really cool.
I'm see, that's the thing. It was funny. So I'm exactly where you are, Steve, with that show. My wife, on the other hand, she's the true crime person. So she's, yeah. So we each represent those two communities.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Before I forget, last thing about Prodigy, I appreciate that the plot that time is not like, oh, the entire galaxy is going to be destroyed. No, it's not even like, it's just a computer virus thing. That's, I don't know. It was just nice to have a slightly smaller story for once.
And I like that. And I like that it felt like they paid off pretty much everything they set up by the end of the first season. They left a few things open. There's still the Chakotay thing, and there's still like, there's some time travel stuff, like to that they can follow up on in the next season. But all of the major story arcs were fulfilled by the end of the first season. So it didn't really feel like they were stretching anything out or intentionally like saving something, holding anything back. It feels like, when they start season 2, it's going to feel like a new story, not a continuation of the story we were telling in season 1 that we didn't finish because we knew we had another season coming, and I love that. I love the feeling of completion, but there's another story coming.
Well, here's one codicil to that though. And I agree with you. Here's the thing that I think is kind of interesting, and this was Objects at Rest was the next to last Babylon 5 episode.
Okay, yeah.
So what I loved about that is that there were some threads that they closed a lot of the threads, in Objects in Motion with the episode of 4 and in Objects at Rest. There were a bunch of threads unfulfilled, and they're never going to be fulfilled. Because the idea of because remember the last scene in Objects at Rest is you see the command bridge from space and it has all the new people. So basically all the regular players on this station have been replaced by somebody. Everybody, like Sheridan's moved on and Delenn and all these. So everybody's elsewhere. And so the idea is that the story is never over.
Yeah.
Because that's the problem I have with a lot of sitcom endings where everything gets tied up in a nice bow and everybody gets married and everybody gets a new job and all this kind of stuff. And actually, one of the things you got a lot of shit, but I liked it. With the last episode of The Big Bang Theory, they're hanging out on the couch just like they've always been.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like so they're like all that stuff that happened before, it's going to keep happening. But you're not going to see it because that's just the way life is.
The show's over. Yeah. That was very much the feeling of the ending, because you just reminded me of the last episode of NYPD Blue is very much like that. The way they chose to end NYPD Blue was they just did a typical episode. Mm-hmm. And the only difference was Sipowicz had been promoted to sergeant, and this was the episode where he finally takes command of the detective squad. Mm-hmm. So that's like the culminating moment. But everything else in the actual story, it's just a typical episode of NYPD Blue, right. And that's the feeling you get, is that, yes, we've reached this moment of culmination for Sipowicz where now he's gone from like, the outcast with the drinking problem. It was, this deeply prejudiced, hateful guy at the beginning of the show. And now he has reformed and grown and matured and gotten himself together. And now he's the leader, and we accept him and think he deserves to be the leader. And he steps up into that position, and that's the point that we step away, but the impression is, well, life's going to go on. And,
what was the show that had it was an HBO show, and the main character was a gangster.
Oh, it's Sopranos.
Like that. Sounds like the way that I never watched it, but it sounds like the way Sopranos ended, but it pissed everybody off for some reason.
Well,
I will say
It was like it was ambiguous. It was
It was
just like
ambiguous,
don't
yeah.
stop and then blank. But like I know the theory of like what happened, as it were. If anyone cares about spoilers, I've never seen Sopranos, but like I think knowing what like people have speculated, that's when like the main character got whacked, and it makes sense, as it were. So it's just like it's not as satisfying, but I think for that show it kind of works. Again, never seen the show Sopranos, but as it were. But like, hey, got everyone talking.
I know there are a lot of people who really are resistant to even incredibly mild ambiguity in endings. I remember a couple years ago I did a video about like where I pitched a rewrite of the last episode of Star Trek Voyager. And my idea for the last episode of Voyager I had a couple of I pitched a couple of different ideas, but my preference for it was like it would have been a completely different story than the one they did. It wasn't just like a rejiggering of Endgame; it was a completely different story. And the idea was that they would find a way. They would find a way to get back to the Alpha Quadrant, but it involved using the transporter. It was like a long distance, like subspace transporter. And so they could beam everybody off the ship and beam everybody home, but they had to leave the ship behind. And because they didn't want to just leave the ship there unattended, before Janeway beams out, she sets the self-destruct. So the ship is going to destroy itself after Janeway beams off, because she's the captain. She's the last one off the ship. So my idea for the ending was Janeway's the last one on the ship. Everybody else has beamed home, and she's taking like a last walk from the bridge to the transporter room, and sort of, just taking one last look around. And you can hear the countdown of self-destruct going, and it's where she's not going to beam out with like 2 seconds to spare, but you hear the countdown, that the destruction is imminent. And the ending of the series, in my idea, is she gets up on the transporter pad and she says, "Beam me home," and that's it. And you don't get to see the ship explode. And there were a lot of people in the comments of that saying, "We need to see the ship explode."
It's like, no.
And I said, and I said, well, you don't get to see that. Like that's like, if it was my episode, like if they actually had let me do that, like, well, you don't get to see that. That's not the ending.
Hey Steve?
Yeah.
What I love about that is I thought you were going Sleeping in Light.
Oh yeah, no.
Nope.
No. The idea, because to me, like the whole idea of my concept for that story was to bring the show back to what to me was the most compelling thing about it, which is it's about people trying to get home. If you sand away all the other stuff in Voyager, if there's anything compelling about that show, is that it's about people trying to get home. So the end of the episode is the captain saying, "Take me home."
Right.
And that's the end. And we know, and like the ship, the ship is going to blow up, like I guess somebody could say like, oh, but then, the Hirogen come in at the last second and they, and they cancel the countdown and they take, whatever. That doesn't happen in the episode. You can imagine whatever you want that happened after the last fade to black, but that's not happening in the show. In the show, the impression is clearly, these are the last moments of the ship. The captain has beamed home. Everybody's back home safe. The ship is going to blow up. That's it. We don't see the ship blowing up because there's nothing poetic or beautiful about that. The beautiful part is, it doesn't matter what happens to the ship now. The show's over. The people that were on the ship are all home. The show's over.
So, I much preferred your ending, to be honest.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So
I've actually heard of another thing that used a very similar setup, but instead of the captain going away, the original copy of the holographic doctor actually sings off the ship, because they send a copy to the Alpha Quadrant, but the one still sitting in the computer is the one that sits and monitors the ship as it goes up.
And or I think someone said like the EMH could stay on the ship and the EMH could take the ship home. Which again, to me, it's like, no, you don't get it. The ship doesn't make it home.
Yeah.
That's because it's sad. See, it's it's bittersweet. All the people make it home, but they can't take the ship with them. That's the whole point.
Yes.
If I wanted them to take the ship home, I would have made up a story where the ship makes it home.
Right.
Like
Right.
they have to say goodbye to the ship to get home. That's the point.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Steve. I think that's really good. I mean, Sleeping in Light, that you do get to see Babylon 5 blow up, but it's part of the emotional release. It's part of the emotional release. They built a very emotional episode, and that's your final, because the show is built around the station, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. The station blowing, and there's like that history of the other Babylon stations blowing up or being lost in some way, and with Babylon 5, it's like the theme is like impermanence. You know, like this has been the home of this show for all these years, and it's been the world that these stories have taken place in, and now, but even this doesn't last forever. You know, like that makes more sense. That fits right with that show. But yeah,
the other thing too, that it also pays off something. So if you remember, I think it's Lady Ladira. She's the one that it's The Coming of Shadows is the episode. That's the one where the eye, where they're trying to get the relic called the eye.
Okay.
And then the raiders get involved and they're going to steal it, and then the shadow ship comes out and does this thing. Well, she's looking in her teacup, and she drops it and it smashes in the ground because she's like, I see her, pain, death, fire, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And she predicts that the station will blow up. Well, basically, she's right that the station will inevitably blow up. But the question is whether it was going to be blown up by the shadows in season 3, or if it was going to blow up 20 years later.
Right at the end of his life.
Because she says that nothing can stop this from happening. She's right, but not in the way she thinks. Not in the way she thinks. So it's another kind of small it's a tiny payoff, but as anyone who's when you watch the series 5 times through, you notice these things.
You catch a lot of stuff. Yeah,
I loved that. Was my favorite show was Babylon
5. Before I forget, so
yeah,
I've realized lately that the Enterprise D is probably my favorite ship in all of Star Trek. And it's not just for the aesthetic, although I do love the aesthetic. Like it's the homiest ship. Everything about that ship is designed to be comfortable. And people can make fun of the bridge and say it's hideous all they want. I like the wood finish. I like this whole ski lodge vibe that it has.
I like the bridge.
Yeah, again, it feels like a ski lodge to me.
Or my habit.
But the thing that's neat about that ship is it was a ship built for families, which most ships in Star Trek are not. That's part of why it was so freaking huge. It was meant for whole families to live there for years on end. So imagine, if you will, if you were there for all the traumatic stuff that happened throughout the show, like the time there was a power outage because the ship hit a quantum speed bump and like 100 people died, or the time that everyone kept dying a couple hundred times because you were caught in a time loop, or let's say like the time everyone started turning into animals, or people started vanishing and getting experimented on another dimension, or the time everyone got addicted to a video game that gave you like a hit of ecstasy every few seconds. So think of all the therapy you would need. So let's say you're on that ship for like 7 years, 8 years if you include generations. So you make it through all of that, and then the ship freaking crashes, and that part of your life is over. Say you have a family, like a wife and kids. You've survived everything, but they decide, they don't want to be on another ship like this. So, they're jumping ship. But then you decide you're not quite done yet. You still got a couple years of service of Starfleet left in you. So you follow Picard and the rest onto the Enterprise E. And it's more of a patrol ship, not a family one. So there's fewer people on it. But, you're ready for whatever adventures that lie ahead. And then a year later, a Borg pricks you in the neck and Picard shoots you in the chest.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
Think about how depressing that is.
Well, this is the
it.
thing, though. I mean, it was kind of a neat feature, but it also shows why it's such an incredibly bad idea to put let's have families on board a ship that might get blown up.
Well,
Picard might have a point with that.
It's the sort of thing that like Starfleet should have. It's like after the first mission, Starfleet should have said, "Yeah, you know what? This was a bad idea.
Yeah,
Get those kids off that ship."
I do think it's neat. Sorry.
Well, if you think about it, think what happened with Cisco, right? I mean, Jennifer dies because she's on his ship.
I do think it's neat though the differences between the D and the E, because the E, again, it was huge. The E, yeah, it's a little bit longer, but it has much less internal volume. It's thinner. The dish isn't as wide. It's more of just, again, a patrol. It's basically a giant cop car.
Yeah.
But,
well, I did like the some of the behind the scenes design sketches where the E actually separates. It actually looks much better without the saucer sections. Like you could actually take the two separate ships or two separate sections, and out of those would have just been completely badass. But
the coolest thing about the ship separation, I'm not positive, but to my knowledge, that didn't appear anywhere in canon prior to that episode. But in Starfleet battles, again, which was made in like the late 70s, the Enterprise could the saucer could separate, and the Klingon booms could separate. So I think there's a lot of things that happened in the Starfleet battles universe that basically Paramount just lifted and used.
Yeah.
The Miranda class ship, the Reliant.
Yeah.
That is in Starfleet battles. There's the New Light cruiser. It's the same ship upside down.
Oh yeah,
flipped over. And so basically, the thing was that, and this is one of the reasons why when they at one point in like 86, 87, the Paramount sued Task Force Games because they had gotten their license like through somebody else, and it was kind of like it wasn't totally above boards. But they thought it was. They were acting in good faith. But the thing is that when it went to court, they were basically able to show like, well, you knew these guys were out there doing this because you lifted elements from their game and put it into the Starfleet universe and made it canon, and you did nothing. And there's a principle in copyright law. It's the same as in regular law. There's an idea of adverse possession. So like if it's just that you and I are neighbors and you build your fence 6 inches onto my property or 2 feet on my property, whatever, and I say nothing about it and leave it that way and let you do that after a certain period of time, that's your land.
Right.
The same thing in copyright. If you let me use your copyrighted material and you don't stop me, eventually I get the rights to it.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why the other Bethesda did have to sue a company for like having scrolls in their name or something like that because they have a copyright to all the scrolls.
Yeah, and so that's why companies now are so voracious about suing everybody under the sun, because if they don't defend their copyright, they basically
lose it.
They could lose it. Yeah. But I want to mention. I want to just touch on something that Nick mentioned about, because talking about the Enterprise D.
Talk about the D, of course.
Let's talk about the D some more. Because like I mean, in general, my favorite sets from Star Trek shows and movies, especially like the bridge sets, are usually the ones that feel more real, feel more utilitarian, feel like they could be real ships, like Star Trek 2, Star Trek 6. I love those bridges because they have lots of mechanical switches and lots of things that like you could imagine like 300 years from now maybe Enterprise. That's a real ship. From Enterprise. But the one thing I've always appreciated from just a pure design level about the Enterprise D's bridge is that I think it's the only Star Trek bridge set where it has 2 major levels, and that design actually makes sense because they've done it before, or they've done it since, where the bridge set there'll be like an upper level and a lower level, and like the bridge that they're using, the bridge set for the Titan that they're using in season 3 of Picard right now, a nice looking set, you know, it's not like a badly designed set or anything. I wish they turn the lights on so we can see it a little better. But it's a nice looking, it's a well designed set, but it's like there's stairs everywhere, and it's like there's there's the back portion where like the science stations and the tactical stations are, and then you have to go downstairs to get to the con station, and then you go upstairs to get to the captain's chair, and it's like, what are all these? Why all the stairs? It makes no sense. Especially in a
just make the sorry, go on.
Yeah, well, it's because like every time there's an action scene, people get thrown around all over the place. Why would you put stairs on one of these ships? But with the Enterprise D, there's the lower level
nice
where
smooth ramp.
It's a ramp. It's a smooth ramp. So it's not like a safety hazard, and it flows. It has a beautiful visual flow to it.
Beep chair accessible.
Yes. Yeah, beep chair accessible. Captain Pike would appreciate it. So like, it creates a design where the bridge itself is big enough, and there's a lower level and an upper level, so you can have like little mini locations inside the same set. You can have like, they can set scenes where it's up front with the forward stations, and then back with the captain and the first officer and Counselor Troy in the chairs, and then up high with Worf, and then back behind Worf with those stations in the rear. Like, you can have different locations sort of within the same location, and it makes sense. It feels like, okay, yeah, this doesn't seem like, a bad idea.
Right. It also doesn't give me a sensory overload like most Enterprise bridges do.
Yeah.
Like they're either too bright or too dark, or there's too many lights, or too high contrast.
You know what fixes the new bridge? Just make everything out of foam rubber.
Well, as somebody who designs interfaces for a living, yeah, when I see all that clutter, and I'm like, oh my god, such a bad design. In an emergency, how is somebody going to figure out which of the flashing, flickering, beeping?
You don't like the computer panels in Star Trek II where it's like 30 completely identical unlabeled white buttons. It's like, how the hell does anybody use this?
Sir, all these the lights are blinking out of sequence. We'll get them to blink in sequence.
Spock's there working his control panel, and you're like, this guy must be a genius, because there's like a bank of identical tiny white buttons, and he just knows exactly what to do.
It's like they made fun of that in an Airplane too, right?
Yes,
So
I did.
everybody's
I
got
said
their
that
switches,
line.
the lights and knobs. They're just flashing and they're beeping and they're flashing. I can't take it anymore.
And that great panning shot of the control panel in the cockpit that just goes on forever.
So going back to the design of
please.
The Enterprise D, and from what I understanding, Next Generation, one of the many story directions that it was supposed to go was akin to what Voyager's storyline was supposed to go, as at some point it was supposed to be near Lost in Space, for one of the many directions they had talked about taking the show. Reason why you had the whole families and
it was going to be like a generational ship or something.
Yeah. From my understanding, I mean, this is like just rumors floating around, but that was apparently one of the ideas behind it. Was, it was to open up other story ideas,
right?
So, but
and also, Gene's vision. They will have their families in space. It will be a utopian future where the officers will have their families with them on the ship. Okay, Gene.
There'll be lots of sex.
I like what do you call it? Talking about the reasons why things are designed. One of my favorite fanon kind of jokes is that what do you call it? The reason why a lot of the stuff that seems counterintuitive from an engineering standpoint is that there's cameras everywhere and it's an entertainment for Federation citizens, which is why the councils explode for the purpose of drama when the ship is being attacked,
and why they're filled with rocks for some reason. It's like, why are there rocks in the control panels on the spaceship?
Wait, are you telling me that metal doesn't fragment that way?
I know. Who knew, right?
Talk about the design of the bridge, because I agree with you about the flow of the Enterprise D on the bridge, but it would make more sense to have the captain and the counselor and the first officer
In
elevated.
an elevated position,
That's
so they
true.
could see the screen.
Kind of like the way Krug is in Star Trek 3, you know, in the Klingon
Yeah,
ship.
up above
So it's what
everything.
you can see, but the reason why they don't, of course, is because that's for actor reasons, because they want you to be able to see those actors, because they're, you know,
Sure.
because
It's blocking.
Yar and Worf were pivotal characters, so you need to be able to see them.
Sure. Well, it's just like people wonder, because like when they one of the complaints about Discovery when Discovery started was the bridge is too big, because you know it's supposed to be pre-Captain Kirk era, and it's like the bridge on the Discovery is like twice as big as the bridge on Kirk's Enterprise. And of course the practical reason for that is, well, because it's really hard to shoot on those tiny sets, and the reason they made the bridge so cavernous is because it's just way easier to shoot on a set that big, where there's more camera placements, you know, it's just much less of a pain in the ass. So you know, there's a practical reason behind it, and that was, I think that was probably a benefit of the Enterprise D bridge set too, because that's a pretty big bridge set as well.
I love their solution to that incongruity by making the Discovery Enterprise just the biggest goddamn ship in the universe.
I love it. I love how big Pike's quarters are. Like Pike's captain's quarters on the Constitution class Enterprise in Strange New Worlds are bigger than like anyone's quarters we've ever seen on any Star Trek show ever. He's got a fireplace. He's got a kitchen. I love it. I love it.
Well, see, one of the things I liked about Enterprise, was that, you know, because it did really, you know, a lot of people, you know, criticized its aesthetic, but I'm like, again, as an engineer, I'm looking at it, I'm like, no, this looks like an engineering space. This looks like, you know, hey, we're going into space, and we have to keep this thing as small as possible. So, you know, so we cut down because we're going to be going long distances. We got to, you know, make sure we have enough fuel for propulsion and all that. And so everything is cramped and everything is archaic looking. And I'm like, this was well designed. You know, like I really like that.
The aesthetic of the Enterprise is one of my favorites.
One thing I love about like ship designs when it comes to things like scale is, like, as they get bigger, you have to take certain things into account. Like, would you even be able to see the windows? Like on the Enterprise J, you know, people make fun of that ship. They call it hideous. I'm just confused that you can still see the windows on it. If it's that big, it should be microscopic. This is one thing that I like
because it's
about
probably
Star
very
Wars.
floppy as it flies through space.
This is one thing that I like about Star Wars ship designs, is that, you know, as you go further back into the Clone Wars era and you have like the first Star Destroyer type ships, like the Acclimator class, that's only about a third of the length of the Imperial ones that you get in the original trilogy. And it's just small enough that you can actually see the glass windows on the bridge. You can't see those on the Imperial ones because they're too freaking big. And I love details like that.
Well, going back to the NX Enterprise, I love the design of the ship because it felt like a submarine in space.
Yes.
It felt like, as much as I hated the storyline of that show after the first season, it felt like a submarine in space. Like there was times when like they would just walk down corridors and I'm holding my breath because it feels so cramped in there.
Yeah.
You know, it was the most realistically done starship design.
I agree. I got on board a Russian or ex-Soviet cruise missile sub in Florida. It's not there anymore, unfortunately. But yeah, it is. You're like, oh my god, people lived on this. You know, like
I've been in a submarine too. It's interesting.
One of the things that made me laugh, I guess it was last year. It was in one of the earlier episodes of the new Quantum Leap, which has had its ups and downs. It's kind of settled into a pretty good show at this point. We're late in the first season now. It's like, it's not great, but it's not bad. It's a sort of, okay, I can live with this. But one of the early episodes, Ben leaps into an astronaut on the space shuttle, like back in the 90s. And I'm like, because I love the space shuttle. So I was like, oh, cool. He's an astronaut and he's on the space shuttle, right? And it was neat. It was not a bad episode, but like, there were a couple of scenes that just made me laugh out loud, because there's you know, he's on the space shuttle, but he has to talk to his hologram to find out what's going on and like why he's there, what he has to change. So he has to go somewhere to be by himself. So he's not just talking to his hologram in front of the other astronauts. So he goes into the bathroom, which in this show is big enough for two people to comfortably stand in with space between them and have this conversation. And I'm like, what space shuttle had a humongous bathroom like this where they could just go in and close the door? And one of them, it's like the bathroom in like an apartment, which is, you know, not huge, but if you know about like, again, like the submarine theory, like the space on the space shuttle was at a premium. They didn't have a big bathroom where like two people could go and just kind of hang out, and one could be over here and one could be over here, and they're having a conversation like across the room. That's not how that was.
But, I mean, so even the International Space Station has, you know, like, it's like, what bathroom?
Yeah.
You know,
because there's, you know, first of all, it's zero gravity. So it's not like, you know, you're going to be standing around anyway, and there's not that much room. Like there's just not that much room.
Forget even having a bathroom. They should just have a little thing in the wall. It's like, okay,
like on the
into space,
like on the Apollo spacecraft. Just give me the tube. I gotta go. Just pass the tube.
But then there's some kind of malfunction, and your guts get sucked into space.
Don't flush it yet! Oh God!
You know, it's really funny when you consider how tiny a bathroom is on an airplane. I'm like, yeah, you're not gonna have big.
Exactly. Like you could. I mean, I guess theoretically you can fit two people in there, but it's not designed for that. You're not going to have like a comfortable conversation. And it's like, wow, they even had room for the cameraman. You know, it's a TV show. It didn't really bother me, but it was something I noticed, and I thought, oh yeah, they had to cheat that. That's
consider that some of the mech suit designs in my series are so small that you can't even fit an entire person inside it. Basically, you have to not have any limbs and just be a torso, which thankfully the main character is because they were born without arms or legs.
Yes, but the TARDIS was masquerading as the bathroom.
I would not want to be. I would not want to be without limbs.
But I mean, I don't mind like that. I actually kind of like one of the things about, you know, not even necessarily fantasy fiction, but like any work of fiction. I kind of like impossible spaces. You know, that aren't acknowledged as such. Like if you as the viewer notice, you're like, that doesn't make sense, you know. But like if you look at the establishing shot of what is supposed to be Archie Bunker's house in the credits of All in the Family, it's clearly not the house that set is representing. It's obviously not the same house. If you look at the house that you see in establishing shots in the Golden Girls, clearly not the same house that set is supposed to be. You know, when they go to the garage, they're going in the wrong direction. You know, the living room and the kitchen and everything. There aren't enough bedrooms for all of the bedrooms that there are supposed to be. Like it's just it doesn't work. It doesn't work out. But it does because that's, you know, it's not like anybody ever says we don't have enough bedrooms. Like they you know, if Rose has to go into her room, she goes into that door, and if in the next episode Sophia goes into that room and it's her room, well, okay, you know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense, and I kind of like that, you know.
Who's Betty White's character?
Well, Steve, that reminds me when I was in college. There was a show. It wasn't a sitcom, but I keep forgetting the name of it. But it was set in Hoboken, where I went to college.
Yeah,
and so they actually used 3 real bars that were in Hoboken on the show. So you would see the facade, and those were the real facades of those bars. But the interior, they basically alternated them. So there was Stinky Sullivan's, there was Charlie's, and one other bar I forget. But basically, the interior for Charlie's was Stinky Sullivan's, and the interior for Stinky Sullivan's was actually that third bar. So if you walked into one of them, you'd be like, you know, nothing.
Wait a minute.
Having been to all 3 bars, it was like, oh yeah, oh look at that stain, that was me.
There was I'll mention this, and then I'll get Isaiah, and then we're ending the show because it's been an hour. But anyway, that reminds me, Joe, of there was an episode of the TV show Millennium, which was like the spinoff of the X-Files.
Yep,
They
I've
did that
seen
in the
that show.
90s. Yeah. And in the first season of Millennium, there's an episode that begins with a scene that actually takes place in Hagerstown. Like the crime that Frank ends up investigating, like, begins in Hagerstown. So, you know, I'm watching the episode and fade up, the little, you know, title at the bottom says Hagerstown, Maryland. And I'm like, ooh, you know. And then the scene that actually occurs takes place inside a Piggly Wiggly, which we don't have in Hagerstown. There are no Piggly Wigglies in Hagerstown.
I'm gonna do that.
So right away, I'm like, oh, okay. You know, like, obviously they didn't shoot it here, but also, like, they didn't even, they're like, oh, fuck it, who cares? People know what the Piggly Wiggly is. It's a grocery store. Like, just have it. It doesn't matter. Who cares? The people who made the show probably didn't even realize that there were no Piggly Wigglies in Hagerstown. They didn't care. And you know, and honestly, I don't care either. It's just one of those things that, like, if you notice it, you go, oh, yeah. Okay, no, that's wrong. You know?
I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh,
okay. Isaiah.
Yes. So, two things. So, I think my favorite ship design is actually Voyager because it looks like an airplane. It's a cross between like an airplane and the ship from Futurama. If you guys know that.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And this is what I'm gonna be wearing to Infinity Con. So let me go get it.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so while Isaiah's getting that, then I'll let Isaiah show it off. And like speaking when he comes back, don't forget charity links on the page because like Joanna, Phoenix, Neko, and Lindquin. Okay,
okay.
Isaiah, go ahead.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that's cool.
That is sweet.
Wow.
I still got some major like alterations to do to it, but I'm gonna be wearing this.
That looks
nice.
cool.
That's really cool. I like that a lot.
All right, all the other like plugs are in the live chat. Isaiah Taylor has 2 YouTube channels and Instagram where he does show up pictures of like that sort of thing too as well.
Slow down.
Oh, the boots.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Yep, Isaiah got everything.
I dig it.
And I'm supposed to slow down, so and breathe.
And the helmet. That's really cool.
So I actually may win this year because I think they like amateur made costumes, and like I got the costume from eBay. Well, like the very basic costume from eBay, and I'm just adding to it. So
exactly. Much like what you do with your modeling ships, you get the models and you put them together, and that takes some like talent to do that too as well. But then you also add lights to your models too, and that just like totally like elevates those kind of things too. It's really cool, and and thank you for showing us and thank you for sharing that. I'm so impressed by that X-wing you built because that was all handmade. It's just like holy crap!
Yeah,
there it is.
I don't know if you saw it, Steve, but yeah, this is made out of paper, and so I did that. I actually,
that is really impressive.
I actually made that for Rogue One when the Rogue One movie came out, so I made it in honor for that, and I just kept it. So
yeah, keep it. That's cool.
Awesome.
They have a lot of competitions and stuff for cosplay.
Yeah. So Steve, what do you have coming? What do you have coming up this week on the Sea Shots YouTube channel? What can we look forward to?
As a matter of fact, I have a special bonus video going up later today. At 6 p.m. Eastern, it goes up. It's a video I'd made because it's funny. Like the last time we did this, Lauren, who wasn't with us this time, talked about how I used to do a lot of videos about atheist stuff, you know, and that I don't really do that as much. And I said, well, if I come up with like an idea or a topic that allows me to, do that, I would be more than open to do it. As it turns out, I found a topic that allows me to do it. There's a claim going around on the internet that actually got some coverage in newspapers and such of an alleged miraculous healing that took place where a woman who had to have 3 of her toes amputated, claims that the toes grew back after she was prayed over at a miracle service. Except, weirdly enough, nobody has seen the toes. There's no video footage or picture of her healed foot. It's just take my word for it, my toes grew back. So I did a video about that goes up at 6 p.m. Eastern today, and then tomorrow there's a video about something that's been bothering me for a few years now. There's a commercial that airs every once in a while for Altria, which is the parent company of Philip Morris, that is basically like a stealth cigarette commercial that really has kind of pissed me off. So I made a video about that. That goes up tomorrow. Wednesday is another not actually Trek Actually video. And also Wednesday is Dana and I doing Trek Reluctantly. We're watching another episode of Agatha Christie's Poirot this week. So yeah, lots of fun stuff. Lots of fun stuff coming up.
Also, Ask Away on Friday.
Ask Away on Friday. Yes, Ask Away on Friday. Absolutely.
Where I'm gonna ask Steve.
Oh boy.
Is it possible that our I'm trying to see I can word this.
You have until Friday, so don't worry.
Yeah, you can workshop it, you know.
Is it difficult to find a girlfriend who's into Star Trek?
Oh, I would guess it wouldn't be. I mean, there's lots of babes that are into Trek. You know, but I've never actually specifically tried to look.
I married one. I married one. In fact, she saw them first run.
Well,
hey,
my parents,
classic.
My mom was into Star Trek.
But that's when I was around.
But, my wife is still in her original packaging.
Wow.
Also, Dana and I are going to be collaborating on something relatively soon.
Yes.
I was away for a bit, so we that kind of threw off our schedules, and then she was busy this weekend. But we're thinking possibly next weekend that we'll be able to. It's going to be something, you know, kind of game related, but she also wants to kind of get some philosophy in there. So it'll be interesting to see where that conversation goes. But look for that. And just real quick, real fast, last thing I'll say, I just noticed that there was Ahmad Best had a role on Mandalorian. Apparently they did him a solid, which is great, because everyone knows what happened to him after being Jar Jar, all the vitriol and hatred he got, suicide.
Yeah.
The fact that, you know, they actually tried to pick him up. I think that's wonderful, because he's a good guy.
He's a good guy and a good actor, and it was very nice to see him, even though, to tie it back to something that we were talking about earlier, his scene was completely filler. All right, I'm ending the show. Thanks for watching, everybody. Patreon.com/Steve Shives. Full circle.
Do on it once for once.
Yes,
you were able to join.
Yes, it was good to see you. Yes. Patreon.com/Steve Shives, or click the join button to become a channel member. Thanks everybody for your support. Thanks everybody for joining me and for joining us. And we'll see you next month to do this again. Bye everybody.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Take care of yourselves.